Hi there and welcome to this 2-minute tips video, and today we're going to be looking at the customized control dials functionality on the Z series cameras. Now this is perhaps a piece of functionality that I should have covered earlier in the series because it's quite a useful piece of functionality and allows you to tweak how the main and sub dials function in different situations. Just to orientate, the main dial is the one here at the back and the sub dial is the one on the front of the camera. So let's start by looking at the settings and seeing what tweaks we can make. So you go into the menu settings, you go to the custom settings menu, you go down to F controls, and within there F5 is custom control dials, and within the F5 options there are 4 different sub options. Firstly, there is reverse rotation, and this allows you to reverse how the dials operate in specific opportunities. You can adjust how they operate when you're using them for exposure compensation, and you can adjust them for how they operate when you're using them to adjust shutter speed or aperture. So really simple piece of functionality. They will operate one way when it's turned on and the opposite way when it's turned off, and it comes down to a personal preference for how you use your camera and which way feels natural for you. So the next option down is change main stroke sub. So let's start by looking at how the dials operate when we're in a normal sort of operation. Now in manual mode, in M setting, the main or the rear dial will adjust your shutter speed, and the sub dial, the front dial, will adjust your aperture setting. Now if we go into the exposure setting, there are 3 settings. If you have it turned off, then it will operate as I've just described, with the shutter speed being adjusted by the main rear dial and the aperture being adjusted by the sub or front dial. If you go to on, then it reverses this. So the shutter speed would be adjusted by the sub dial on the front, and the aperture would be adjusted by the main dial, which is the rear one. If you adjust it to on mode A, then in aperture priority, aperture will move to being controlled by the main dial, not the sub dial at the front. So it allows you to set up how you want the different dials to operate shutter speed and your aperture. And between the different options, you can adjust it to work as you want it to. So exposure setting is about adjusting how shutter and aperture are controlled by the 2 dials. Autofocus setting works with another setting in the controls menu, F2, where we can assign the focus mode and autofocus area mode to a custom button. I have it set to my F1 button on the front of the camera, and when I press the F1, then I can use the rear main dial to switch the autofocus setting from autofocus continuous to autofocus single. And I can use the front sub dial to change the autofocus area mode from narrow point of view to wide area autofocus to single point, depending on the setting. If you set the autofocus within this F5 setting to on, then it reverses this. So you would control the autofocus continuous to autofocus single mode with the front dial, and you would change the autofocus area mode with the rear main dial. So again, very simple, but allows you to customize how you want your camera to work. The third option, menus and playback, is really about whether you want to use just the multi-selector or touch screen to move through different settings on your menu and playback, or whether you want to be able to use the main and sub dials to move around as well. So if it's set to off, then you just use the multi-selector and the touch screens to move around the different settings in the menu. If it's set to on, then you can also use the main dial to change the settings and scroll through different settings or change the settings or the playback as well. And this can be useful for if you've got a lot of images to move through. It may be quicker and more intuitive to use the dials than the multi-selector or the screen. The final setting, on, excluding image review, just allows you to use the dials in the menus but not the playback setting. So I have this set to on in my camera because I do find it quite useful, perhaps when I'm scrolling through images, to sometimes use the touch screen, but also to use the dial to quickly scroll through. Finally, option 4, subdial frame advanced, is really in collaboration with option 3, the menus and playback, and it allows you to define how the subdial, the front dial, will operate when you're in that mode. And within here you've got various options for how the subdial works. You can use it to advance or go back 10 frames, 50 frames, to move between folders. You can allow it to adjust whether it shows all of the images or just those that you've given a certain rating, those that are protected. You can show still images only, or you can show movies only. So there's lots of different options for how that subdial will operate. So between the 4 options, there's a lot of different flexibility to adjust how those 2 dials, the main dial and the sub dial, operate, and it comes down to personal preference, and it's worth spending a bit of time just playing around with them to see how and which ones work for you, because it really is a bit of a personal preference. So let us know in the comments below, have you still got your camera set to the default settings, or have you spent some time and gone in there and tweaked your preferences? If so, how have you done that? As always, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified of future videos. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on a future video.